Daf Yomi, Tractate Zevachim, page 103b. Top of the page with the words, not the very, very top, but maybe one line in, with the words Or Ha'olah. Ainli Ela Or Ha'olah. Those words. Okay? Or Ha'olah. Ainli Ela Or Ha'olah. Oirois Kodesh Chadash Minahin Tameloima. Or Ha'olah Asher Ikri Yochashani Mar Ve'av Kodeshim Kalim Tameloma Ola Ma'ola Kodesh Kodeshim Av Kol Kodesh Kodeshim. And now for the English, the Anglit. Okay. And from the phrase, the hide of the burnt offering, I have derived only that the priests acquire the hide of the burnt offering. From where do I derive that they acquire the hides of all offerings of the most sacred order? The verse states, the hide of the burnt offering which he has offered, which serves to include any offering that the priests sacrifice. If so, one might have thought that I include even offerings of lesser sanctity, therefore the verse states burnt offering, and not simply offering to teach that just as a burnt offering is an offering of the most sacred order, so too the priests acquire the hides only of all offerings of the most sacred order. They do not acquire the hides of offerings of lesser sanctity. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Or Ha'olah, Ainli Ela Ha'olah, Oirois Kodesh Kadosh Minayin, V'dinhu Ma'olah, Shelo Zachu B'Vsara, Zachu Ba'oiro, Kodesh Kadosh Zachu B'Vsaran, Eino Din Zachu Ba'oiron. The writer continues, Rabbi Yishmael says, there is a different derivation. From the phrase, the hide of the burnt offering, I have derived only that the priests acquire the hide of the burnt offering. From where is it derived that they acquire the hides of all offerings of the most sacred order? It is based on a logical inference, just as in the case of a burnt offering, for which the priests do not acquire its meat. The priests nevertheless acquire its hide. Then, in the case of offerings of the most sacred order, for which priests do acquire its meat, is it not logical that they acquire the hides? Mizbeach yochiach. One may counter, then let the altar prove that this is not a valid kal v'chomer. Mizbeach yochiach, shezacha bebasav v'lozach be'or. Ma mizbeach shekein lo zachu b'miktzas, toma b'kohanim shezachu b'miktzas, v'zachu b'miktzas zachu b'chulei. One may counter, let the altar prove that this is not a valid kal v'chomer of aforter inference. It acquires the meat, and still, as it acquires the meat, and it still does not acquire the hide. One may respond, what is notable about the altar? It is notable in that it does not acquire hides in any instance. Will you say the halacha concerning the altar should teach the halacha concerning the priests who acquire hides of some offerings, as the Torah explicitly grants them the hides of burnt offerings? Rather say, since the priests acquire hides of some of the offerings, they acquire the hides of all the offerings of the most sacred order. Rabbi Omer, Kol Atzmo Lo Hutzrachnu, Ela Lo Oil Bilvad, Shebechol Makom O, Mahalech Achar Baso. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, there is no need to derive that the hides of offerings of the most sacred order go to the priests. We need the verse itself only to teach that this is the halacha with regard to the hide of the burnt offering. as the Torah does not generally require that an offering be filleted. In all other cases, the hide of the offering follows the flesh of the offering. Porim hanisrofin usirim hanisrofin hein v'oris hanisrofin nimorin chatas v'oshim zichisham mitzibo matan el kohen ratzu mafshiti noisan lo yiratzu echlin oisan al gabi oiran kadosh mkalim lebailim ratzu mafshiti noisan ratzu echlin oisan al gav oiran. For example, bulls that are burned and goats that are burned must be burned themselves and their hides burned with them. As the Torah states explicitly, see Leviticus 4:11 and 12, a sin offering and a guilt offering and a communal peace offering are given as a gift to the priests. See Leviticus 7:7. If the priests want, they may fillet them. They may fillet them and use the hides. And if they do not want to use the hides, they may eat the offerings together with the hides. Offerings of a lesser sanctity are given to the owners. If they want, they may flay them and use the hides. And if they want, they may eat the offerings together with their hides. Amar Aval Ola, it wasn't Amar Ola, it was Aval Ola. Aval Ola nemar ba b'hifshites ha'ola v'litach ota l'indatache yachol lo yehu ha'kohanim zagim be'oira Talmud Omar or ha'ola asher ikriv. But with regard to a burnt offering, it is stated, and he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into its pieces. Leviticus 1:6. One might have thought that because all flesh of the burnt offering is burned on the altar, the priests have no right to its hide. Therefore, the verse states, the priest shall have to himself the hide of the burnt offering that he has sacrificed. Leviticus 7:8. Lo yeh prat l'tful yom u'mechus ha'kippurim ve'oinon shiachol lo yizku b'aso shu achila yizku b'oil she'eno l'achila l'tamid noma lo yeh. Okay? The phrase, the priest shall have to himself, serves to exclude a priest who immersed that day, and a priest who has not yet brought atonement offering, and an acute mourner, meaning that they do not receive a share of the hides, just as they do not receive a share of the meat. As one might have thought, that all the priests will not acquire the meat. This is because it is for consumption, and they are not permitted to partake of it. But they will acquire the hide because it is not for consumption. Therefore, the verse states, shall have to himself, to exclude a priest who has not yet brought an atonement offering, and a priest who has immersed that day, and an acute mourner. Okay? V'tana kamanami tepuk. Le'vidino asim kavachayim yataf because of the grub. The Gemara asks, but let the first Tana also derive the halacha logically as Rabbi Ishmael did. Well, why did he cite a verse? The Gemara answers, often when there is a matter that can be derived through an a fortiori inference, the verse nevertheless takes the trouble and writes it explicitly. Okay. Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Ishmael. Hi, Asher Hikriv Mark Avile, Pratit Kol Yom, Mechus HaKippurim Oinen. And as for Rabbi Ishmael, what does he do with the phrase, the hide of the burnt offering that he sacrificed, from which the first time it derives the halacha? He holds that it serves to exclude a priest When worse a day, a priest who has not yet brought an atonement offering, and the acute mourner who do not receive a share in the hinds. V'tepukle mi lo yeh b'mishmol l'tameh damar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Ishmael nemer ba'oila lo yeh v'nemer ba'ashem lo yeh ma lahalan atzvotav utahin afkan atzvotav utahin. The Gemara challenges will let Rabbi Ishmael derive this halakha from the phrase "shall have to himself," as does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. The Gemara explains that Rabbi Ishmael conforms to his line of reasoning, so that the phrase teaches a different halakha. As Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, it is stated, "shall have to himself," Leviticus 7:8. With regard to a burnt offering, it is stated, the priest makes atonement, he shall have to himself, Leviticus 7:7. With regard to a guilt offering, the following verbal analogy is derived from here. Just as there, after the blood of the guilt offering is presented, its bones become permitted for the priest for any use, since only the portions intended for consumption on the altar are sacrificed, whereas the rest of the animal is given to the priests. So too here, with regard to a burnt offering, its bones are not attached to the flesh and are therefore not intended for the altar. Are permitted. Mufne di la mufne ikab lemifrach mala shem shikim besay mutala iye karavisiyahu. With regard to this verbal analogy, the Gemara comments, it must be that those terms are free, meaning superfluous in their context, and therefore available for the purpose of establishing a verbal analogy. As if they are not free, the verbal analogy can be refuted as follows. What is notable about a guilt offering is notable in that its meat is permitted to the priests, unlike flesh of a burnt offering, which is burned upon the altar, and perhaps this is why the bones of the guilt offering are also permitted. Since the phrase "shall have it to himself" is a superfluous term in each verse, the analogy stands because the verbal analogy based on free terms cannot be refuted logically. And now we start a new Mishnah. Kol HaKadashim she'era b'hen pasul kodem shehefshetan. Eino Yehoshua l'Kohanim. L'achar hefshetan Yehoshua l'Kohanim. Amar Rabbi Chia skan HaKohanim. Okay, the Mishnah says if any offerings of the most sacred order were disqualified prior to their flaying, their hides do not go to the priests. Rather, they are burned together with the flesh in the place of the burning. If they were disqualified after the flaying, their hides go to the priests. Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest, said, in all my days, I never saw a hide going out to the place of burning. Amar Rabbi Kiva, midvar l'manusha, amar shidas b'chol, v'nimtzat reifa she'osa kohanimo, v'chomim in lorinu raya ela yetzel v'sasre. Rabbi Kiva said in the statement of Rabbi Hanina, deputy high priest, we learned that in a case where one flays the firstborn offering, and the animal is later discovered to have a wound that would have caused it to die within 12 months, the halacha is that the priests may derive benefit from its hide. And the rabbis say the claim, we did not see, is no proof. Rather, if after flaying it is discovered the animal was unfit before it was flayed, the hide goes out to the place of burning. Okay, now for the Gemara. Here we are. Call. שלא זכה מזבח מסורת לא זכה כהנים מוירה אף על פי שפשטר או כהן מזריק אמרני רבי אליעזר רבי שמעון אמר אין אדם רצה gotta charge the battery here. Okay, I'm not sure where I left off, so I'm just gonna start from Rabbi Akiva. I probably said it already, but I'll say it again. Rabbi Akiva, midvarav l'madu shem mafshita es b'chol v'nim tzatreifa shows an akohanim ba'oiroi b'chol v'imrin ein Lo ra'inu raya ela yatsa lebeis esrecha. Rabbi Akiva said, from the statement of Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest, we learn that in a case where one flays the firstborn offering and the animal is later discovered to have a wound that would have caused it to die within 12 months, which is a treifa, the halacha is that the priests may derive benefit from its hide. And the rabbis say, claim, we did not see, this is no proof, rather, if after flaying it, it is discovered that the animal was unfit before it was flayed, the hide goes out to the place of burning. And now for the Talmud. Now for the Talmud's portion on this Mishnah. Okay? Now. כל שלא זכה מזבח וסולו זכה כהנים ואוירה אף אף רגל שתי לאור קודם זריקה מעני רבי אלעזר ברבי שמעון היא דאמר אין אדם מרצה על האור בפני עצמו. The previous Mishnah 103a teaches in the case of any burnt offering for which the altar did not acquire its flesh, for example, if it was disqualified prior to the sprinkling of its blood, the priests did not acquire its hide. The Mishnah does not state any qualification indicating that this is the halacha, even if the priest flayed the hide before the sprinkling of the blood on the altar. The Gemara posits whose opinion is this. It is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, who says the blood does not affect acceptance of the hide by itself, meaning it affects acceptance only. It affects acceptance of the hide only together with the flesh. Since the flesh is disqualified and the sprinkling does not affect its acceptance, the sprinkling does not affect acceptance for the hide either. Ema Seifa, tell me the Seifa. Ema Seifa kol HaKadashim she'eira b'hem pasul kodem she'hefsheitan ein orosehen HaKohanim לאחר הפשיטן או רוציהן הכהנים עתן לרבי דאמר אדם מרצה על האור בבני עצמו רישא רבי אלעזר ורבי שמעון ספר רבי. The Gemara challenges, say the latter clause, meaning the Mishnah here, if any offerings of the most sacred order were disqualified prior to their flaying, their hides do not go to the priests. If they were disqualified after flaying, their hides go to the priests. This indicates that once the hides are flayed, they go to the priests even if the flesh was disqualified before the sprinkling of the blood. If so, we arrive at the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, who says the blood affects acceptance of the hide, meaning renders the hide permitted to the priests by itself. Can it be that the former clause of the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, and the latter clause is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Amar Abaye me the Sefer Rabbi Reshanami Rabbi Umoder Rabbi She'ein Hefshit Kodam Zrika. Abaye says, since the latter clause is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, it must be that the former clause is also the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And although Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds that in principle the priests should acquire the hides if they are removed before the flesh is disqualified, in any case, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi concedes that the flaying is not done before the sprinkling, since the offering cannot be disqualified before the hide is removed. Practically speaking, the priests will never acquire the hides unless the altar acquires the flesh, as taught in the former clause. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, my Kodim Hefshet. To be continued. Rava said, on the contrary, since the former clause is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, it must be that the latter clause is also the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon. When the Mishnah states that the priests acquire the hides if the flesh was disqualified after the flaying, it must mean that the flesh was disqualified after the sprinkling. Therefore, what does the Mishnah mean by the phrase before flaying? To be continued.